I get tear up just thinking about like grieving is hard. It's hard work. It takes a lot of courage to grieve, and I think a lot of times when we hear the word grieve, we think of like the loss of a loved one. Like we have to grieve and mourn the death of a loved one. But what we don't realize is that we also have to grieve metaphorical deaths. Cool, man.
Hey everyone, this is Greg Washington with Guards Down, and today I would like to welcome a very close friend and special guest, Caleb. How you doing, brother?
Dude, I'm doing so good, man. It's been so long.
I know, man, it has. Caleb Campbell and I, we played football together at West Point. He was an all-star athlete, and you graduated. You were able to make it to the pros. Um, tell us a little more about all of that.
Yeah, man, it was an interesting journey for sure. I think it was always that childhood dream of making it to the NFL, growing up in Texas. And I think uh, early on, especially in Texas, with kind of growing up in mainstream evangelical Christianity, you somehow kind of morph into this understanding that God's purpose for your life is football or sports. And that's really kind of what I how to receive love through performance, right? I talk often when I'm giving keynotes, I talk about this 6-year-old little boy, Caleb, uh, remembering vividly, and something that I've had to do a lot of work around was remembering that 6-year-old boy scoring a game-winning touchdown in flag football. And afterwards, my mother came up to me and she said, Caleb, son, we love you so much. You just scored the game-winning touchdown. In that moment, I heard and I correlated scoring touchdowns with earning love. And so my life that really shaped and defined my life in so many ways. And really life suddenly became all about literally and metaphorically scoring touchdowns. So whether it was getting A's in high school and being an all-star athlete in high school and being a stand-up guy, doing whatever I can to create and produce achievements, create success in my life so that I could earn more love. And then carry on that to West Point. It was all about, performance on the football field. And that performance is where I found the acceptance that we all genuinely as human beings crave. And it was interesting because I knew when I went to West Point, that NFL dream, it was over. And honestly, I didn't think I was even good enough to play in the NFL. I've never thought that I was necessarily good enough to play in the NFL. And then my sophomore year, as so many people know, that new alternative service obligation policy came through, and I did have a good, successful season my sophomore year. I think at one point, I think Bobby Ross was a coach then. He pulled me into the office and he said, Caleb, I just want you to know you're the sixth, based on statistics, you're the sixth rated strong safety in the country. And that's when scouts started to come around. That's when agents started to come around. And then suddenly, this childhood dream of playing in the NFL was a reality because I was producing, I was performing on the football field, but B, there was this new policy that was allowing us to potentially play a professional sport coming out of West Point, coming out of the United States Military Academy. And, fast forward a couple of years, I go through West Point. It's crazy, Greg, because, I'm an 18-year-old, 19-year-old cadet, and I'm sitting at a table with a 3-star general. We're on a conference call with a couple of 3-star generals in the Pentagon. I'm sitting with the dean of academics, the commandant, and the superintendent, and a handful of, full bird colonels. And they're telling stations that nobody kid. trying to process all of this. And the thing is I got to the NFL, Greg, and that 6-year-old boy was so afraid of not being good enough. Because if I wasn't good enough, if I didn't have what it takes, how would I find acceptance? How would I find love? How would I find my place in this world? And the NFL, I'm so grateful for that opportunity, because although it did not unfold the way anybody really would expect or hope that your time in the NFL would unfold, you think like, I'm going into the NFL, I want to make a lot of money, I want to have a standout career, I want to produce, I want to be remembered for this. But the NFL was a tool in my life that it wasn't so much about scoring touchdowns anymore. It was about learning why scoring the touchdowns were so important to begin with. And so it really became, the NFL applied enough pressure on my life to begin to surface a lot of unresolved trauma, a lot of unresolved grief, a lot of emotional trauma, a lot of fear just begin to rise to the surface. And I did not have the tools. I did not have the resources. I did not have the awareness, emotional awareness to process any of that. And so I bottled it up. I hid it. I suppressed it. I denied it. And then that began to surface in very toxic ways that I realized that if I don't change something and change something soon, it was really only going to be a matter of time before I ended my life.
Yeah.
That was a very clear thought process, and the guilt that you would feel from that, because here I am in the NFL, and I'm living so many so-called dreams, but I hate my life. I hate life, and I don't know what to do. And that's when I kind of decided, after self-destructing so much, that it's time to walk away from the game and go figure out what's really going on in my life.
Yeah. You hit on so many different points. You talked about sports, being successful in sports and acceptance. You've talked about religion and the direction that it's taken you in life. You talked about the trauma and the grief and how you bottled it up. And, in the destructive behaviors, right, that you displayed. And so you're at this point now where you're living, right? And so the questions that I have for you are around, the positive, the focus portion of it, or the healing portion of it. How was it, when you first had to identify with you had a problem, or you weren't happy?
Mm-hmm. I think denial is one hell of a drug, and I think we can deny the existence of our reality for a while. But there was a moment where I remember I was playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. I had just signed a contract, and my time in the NFL, as I kind of said, was very fickle, right? I never felt like I belonged anywhere, no matter, with the Lions or with the Colts. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I had a place. I didn't feel like it was a good fit, being on those teams or the positions, so on and so forth. And I remember when I got to the Kansas City Chiefs, everything clicked, man. Like, I was like, this is it. Like, I feel like I belong. I feel like this is a good fit for me. I love Kansas City. I love the coaching staff. Like, this is a really good fit for me. And I remember my first practice in the NFL, and in practice, as you know, practice, especially in the league, it's everything. If you don't practice well, sayonara, you're getting cut. So like, performing in practice, you got to perform like it's a game. It's really important. And I remember my first practice with the Kansas City Chiefs, I crushed it. Like, I had two pass breakups. I had a forced fumble. I had, I think, 2 sacks. It was just, I just balled out. And it was the first time that I'm a football player again, like, I've got my feet underneath me and I'm moving fast. And it was amazing because I was like, this is what I'm looking for. And I remember after practice, I was walking off the field and, you know, all my teammates now from the Chiefs, they were patting me on my back. They were welcoming me. They were saying, what's up? It was cool. And after we got done with practice, we had an immediate team meeting before we broke for lunch. And here we are, the entire team sitting in this conference room, and we're watching this film unfold. And you have to understand, when I was in the NFL, I hated team meetings where we would watch film as a team, because it was literally a watch Caleb screw up performance. Like, it was, I was an embarrassment. It was just humiliating to me. I would literally almost have panic attacks. And this time it was different, because this time I'm like, I just crushed it out there. Like, this is amazing. And so we go and we start watching film, and then I see myself up on the big screen, and the coach stops the film and says, "Where's the new kid?" And I was like, "You talking about me, coach?" He's like, "Yeah, where's the kid from West Point?" And I was like, "I'm right here, coach." Like, Caleb. And he says, he looks at me, and he basically tells me, if I ever do this again, I will never see any time on the field for as long as I play under him. And he broke apart this play where I actually had a successful, I think it was a pass breakup or a forced fumble, but I didn't execute one thing properly. And in that moment, man, I had to walk out of the meeting room because I was holding back tears. I wanted to just erupt in rage. I was done. And this had nothing to do with not being able to take constructive criticism. Like, I can handle constructive criticism. Go through West Point, you've got to learn how to handle constructive criticism.
Yeah.
This was about, when is it good enough? When am I ever going to be good enough that I can actually rest in life? When am I ever going to be good enough that I feel accepted? When can it ever be good enough? And I realized in that moment that good enough was never going to be good enough. I was never going to be good enough or reach this level of success in life to really find the love and acceptance that I was craving on the inside. And not being able to find that love, it's almost like I had this macro approach and perspective of my life, and realizing that not finding a level of success that could match my inner desire for acceptance in life, or my inner desire for significance in life, is what illuminated the void. And then that's when I would begin to cope in very toxic ways, trying to fill the void, trying to suppress and deny my fear or the feelings that were so uncomfortable at that time. And I just had this awareness in this moment of like, I've got to walk away. If I want to survive, if I actually want to live my life, I have to walk away from this and figure out what the hell is going on in my heart. And that was just a moment where I think I reached this level in life where enough is enough. I can't fake it anymore. I'm done. And denial wasn't doing me any good, and I needed help. And that's when the moment I would say that everything shifted, and I told myself that it's time to walk away from the game and go discover who Caleb Campbell really is.
Yeah. And so with that, right, looking back on life, what would you tell your 18-year-old, 23-year-old self back then, what you know now? What advice would you give?
To have more fun, like to enjoy life a little bit more, to play more. Like, it's okay. You don't have to be so tense. You don't have to be so aggressive. Just, you're going to get where you're supposed to be. So enjoy it. Have fun. I think that's been big for me. I think learning how to have fun in life, learning how to enjoy life, learning how to be happy has been a decade-long journey, Greg. Like, I used to be, literally, part of my French, miserable as fuck. Like, I hated life. I had an anger problem. I was mad at people. I was mad at myself. I was mad at God. And I was so, like, willpower was not the problem. Tell me to climb Mount Everest, and I'm going to climb Mount Everest. I got the perseverance. I've got the persistence. I've got the diligence. I've got the hard work ethic. I've got the growth. I've got it all. But I did it at the cost of enjoying life at this moment. And then now suddenly I woke up one day and realized how much of life I've missed out on, because I had this dire need to prove my worth, to find significance, to be somebody. And it took me years to realize that my desire and my dire need to be somebody really illuminated a deeper problem. And that was really beginning to realize that shame has been the driving force behind my entire life. And I'm never going to find what I'm actually looking for until I actually stop, acknowledge, and begin to build resilience around that childhood shame that's been the driving force behind my life.
Yeah. And so with that one, because one thing that really stuck out, you were saying that you were angry at God. And so to now have or find this happiness, would you say, religion played a big part in it?
Yeah, I think I was just actually talking to my fiance about this last night. I think there's been a direct correlation between deconstructing this God that I was taught to believe in as a child and actually finding personal happiness, significance, and contentment in life. So as I look at God and as I deconstruct God and as I challenge the God that I was taught to believe in, and as I just got curious about it, because I think for so long we're taught to believe something about God, and then that's the foundation. There's no asking question. It's the truth, right? But then I remember waking up one day, and this is really after I made the decision to walk away from the NFL, because I moved to Canada and I slept on the basement floor of a church for about 6 years and became a janitor of a church so that I could really begin to heal the emotional trauma keeping me stuck and miserable in life. And I remember asking God and saying, God, I look at this so-called scripture, this Bible that I've been taught to believe and follow my entire life. And it says that you sent Jesus to not only come and to give us life, but life to the fullest. And I remember having this moment where saying, I am not living life to the fullest. This is a bunch of crap. And I need to know, I really need to know either I'm missing something or you're a liar. And I think asking that question almost created it was like almost like that question in and of itself was a prophecy for me to enter into this transformational experience of really deconstructing God. And also as I deconstructed God and as I begin to behold these new images and this new beauty of the Father, of God, I also begin to transform from the inside out. And so there was definitely a direct correlation between deconstructing religion and actually finding personal happiness in life.
Got you, man. That is, listening to you damn near brought a tear to my eye. just
It's good
just
to cry.
because you shared a part that all of us have to do. We grow up to be these tough warriors, young men, young people, young women. Especially coming from West Point, to have to defend our country and do things that aren't necessarily humane, right?
Yeah.
And so in a previous podcast, me and another counselor, we talked about learned behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having to overcome traumatic experiences or overcome grief through establishing new or more healthier habits and behaviors. And so that came to mind when you told me that, you had to move to Canada and live in the basement of a church for 6 years, right? Like you literally had to start over. And I mean, to go from a high profile football player, a West Pointer with, with status, because it's hard to get into West Point, period, to come back to a humble beginning to find yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like speak more to that part, because what I want to do, it's someone out there that needs to hear this, right? I don't know who it is. It's just a person out there that just needs to know what it takes to pick themselves back up.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I was driving into Canada, and I could feel myself, the emotions begin to well up inside of me. And I remember getting just biting my lip because I'm driving and I'm about to have an emotional breakdown. And I'm having this conversation with trying to be positive, trying to remember scriptures and quote scriptures and all these things, you know, and I have no idea what I'm entering into. I have no idea what I'm doing. There's just this inner knowing that I had to go. This is where I'm supposed to be. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And maybe somebody needs to hear this is when you're listening to your heart, when the Spirit is driving your life forward, when you're in tune with that, it's not always logical. It's not always going to make sense. I remember before I left, a 3-star general personally called me and said, Caleb, what are you doing? Why did you turn down the jobs that I got you? You're committing career suicide. And I just remember being like, I got to go, sir. I'm sorry. Like, I'm so thankful for everything you've done, but I've got to go. Like, this is calling me and it doesn't make sense, but I'm hungry and I'm desperate for change. And this is where I'm going. And I remember getting outside of Canada and hearing the voice of the Lord simply say, what do you want in life, Caleb? And I was like, honestly, I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be a professional football player. I don't necessarily want to be rich. I don't want to be I want to find fulfillment. I want to find significance. I want to know who I am. I want to know why I'm here. It was more of these bigger existential questions that really drove my life forward. And I remember in that moment, Greg, clear as day, hearing this response, and it said, Caleb, if you want to find your life, if you want to find all of these things, have you ever stopped and asked what it looks like to lose your life? And I'm like, no, like, no, I'm looking for answers. I'm looking for the next thing. I'm looking, how do I continue to bring my life towards this upward trajectory that we have been taught to believe is success in the only way of life? And you're asking me to let it go? To let go of this? You're asking me to go through a descent before an ascent, before I move up? And I just remember that moment and being like, oh my God, I've never asked myself what it looks like to let go all of the ways that I protect myself, to let go of all the ways that I find acceptance outside of myself or outside of who God says I am, to let go of all the ways that I find validation, all of the ways that I find significance, all of the ways that I find worth. I've never asked what it looks like to let go of all of that, because only when we are willing to surrender all of the external value that we have found in life can we actually begin to tap into the internal value of who we are and why we're here. And so that was a big moment for me, that I realized that my life was no longer all about doing more, being more, or achieving more, and kind of following that upward trajectory in life. My life was all about now letting go, grieving, creating space for what's next. How do I lose my life today, Greg? And I'm telling you, I think it's truly the mark of, I think, what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and it doesn't mean you have to live a small life, right? Losing your life doesn't mean you have to live a small life. Losing your life means that you're going to live from who you actually are, the true you. That's what it means. And I honestly think that's what we're all looking for. And so I think the question is that I ask myself, and anybody out there listening to, I did have to change geographical locations. I had to move, and I needed a safe space. That church became a safe container for me to begin to peel back the layers, to take off all the garments that I've used for years to protect myself and hide the truth about who I really am and what I'm actually processing, what I'm feeling in life. And when I was able to find that safe community, I could begin to take off those masks and practice vulnerability. And I had somebody sitting across from me that could help me process not only what I was feeling, but why I was feeling it. And that began to change my life. And I woke up every day and I asked myself that one question: what does it look like to lose my life today?
Hey guys, it's Jerome. Greg and I wanted to invite you to the community that we created for the whole Guards Down family on Facebook. Jump on Facebook or check the show notes for the Guards Down Facebook group. There you'll be able to find a community of folks who are committed to raising awareness about complex grief and PTSD. Look forward to chatting with you guys in the group. Now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, man.
If that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. So that brings to a good point. right? Because there are people out there that aren't as fortunate, and may not know religion like we know it, or may have a different religion. And so to be able to break that down and understand it, I mean, that puts it in a good perspective of just a person as an individual. You have to take self-inventory of yourself. You said you need to, one, have that desire, and two, be open to it as well, you know, to want to heal and to start that process. What has the grieving process been for you to get to that acceptance point, right? Where you come out of your shell finally?
Yeah, the grieving process is, I get tear up just thinking about, like, grieving is hard. It's hard work. It takes a lot of courage to grieve. And I think a lot of times when we hear the word grieve, we think of like the loss of a loved one. Like, we have to grieve and mourn the death of a loved one. But what we don't realize is that we also have to grieve metaphorical deaths, right? We have to grieve the death of a dream. Whether that dream was you wanting to be a teacher, that dream was you wanting to be married, that dream was you wanting to have kids, that dream, whatever it is, right? We have to dream plans that we've had for life that are no longer going to come to pass. We have to grieve the ways that we were taught to believe about certain things, but we've realized that, you know what, that's just not the truth anymore. There are so many things that we have to grieve, and it's a heck of a process because grief is not linear. Right? It's not like one step after another step after another step. You could be in the grieving process for years and do so much work and just sitting with it and being still in the midst of all those uncomfortable emotions. And then you think that you've moved on, and then all of a sudden you're driving down the road and you get, boom, hit with a wave of grief, right? Because grief, it comes and it goes as it will, right? And I think the big thing about grief is showing yourself, like learning how to show compassion. And that was a big challenge for me, because I've always, and you can probably attest to this, anybody that's been like more of a performance driven person can attest to it. We demand a lot of ourselves. We expect excellence, right? And we demand excellence in everything that we do. And it's so easy to demand ourselves to be better at grieving. Right? And it's kind of like, whoa, because here's the thing. And I've realized that this is the big shift in trajectory and paradigm that had to happen for me. Grieving has nothing to do with willpower. You see, our entire lives, we have been taught and trained on how to be more disciplined, how to persevere, how to do more, how to suck it up, how to drive on, right? We're machines when it comes to willpower. But grieving has nothing to do with willpower. Grieving has everything to do with willingness, a willingness to let go of all the ways that you thought your life was going to unfold, of all the ways that, you know, of all the things that you wanted to experience in life. Grieving has nothing to do with willpower and has everything to do with willingness. And willingness is a posture of your heart. And I know that sounds kind of theoretical or kind of philosophical or out there, but it's a posture of your heart where I'm willing. What does it look like to let go of the plans that I had for my life so that I can create this space to allow what God is really bringing into my life? And that's just a process of learning how to become very aware of your emotions, right? Because I'll be driving down the road, and I remember I did this for an entire year. I carried a notebook in my back pocket, and anytime I knew I had to begin to, as I was grieving that I was no longer going to be a professional football player, or this life that I was taught was the purpose of my life, or that I wanted this big life that I had a dream of since I was a kid, was no longer going to come to pass the way that I expected it to come to pass. That took years to grieve and to let go, because I would be driving down the road and then suddenly I would, get a text message from somebody and be like, what are you even doing with your life right now? Like, I heard you joined a cult, right? And I would be like so embarrassed, and I'd get so angry. And then suddenly all this uncomfortable and very, I don't like to use the word negative because it's very judgmental, but negative emotions would surface. And I would have to say like, okay, I would stop what I was doing, whether I was driving down the road, in the grocery store, and I would take out that little notebook and I would write down every uncomfortable emotion that I was feeling at that time. And then I would try to identify the thought process. And this took time to do. I would identify the thought process, right? Like I just walked away from potentially a 6-figure job. I'm sleeping on the basement floor of a church, earning no money, defaulting on loans, going to probably have to declare bankruptcy. What the heck did I just do with my life? I just made the biggest mistake of my life. That was the thought process, right? And so I'd write that thought process down. And then in my time in counseling or therapy, I would bring this up to my therapist. And then that's what we would use as basically the guidelines, or that's what we would use as like the benchmarks of my therapy sessions, because we would go back and we would say, okay, this is what you're feeling, but what does truth say? What does God say about this? What is the universal truth about this? Did you really just make the wrong decision? Or was God basically not needing you to make a right or wrong decision, but learning how to find the courage to make a decision, right? And so that was a big process for me of just learning and then go and find the truth. And then I would meditate on that truth. I would sit still, meditate, visualize, let go, whatever it might be. And then that was the process of grieving for me, rewiring the neurological makeup of my brain neurons to see the world differently, to shift my paradigm. And so as much of it as it was spiritual, it was also physiological, right? There was so much like science inside of it too. But that was the process of grieving. But if there's anybody that's in this season of needing to let go of an identity, needing to let go of a reputation, needing to let go of all these things, like you have to be compassionate towards yourself. It takes time, and you have to be willing. And this, I think, is really important. You have to be willing to, if grieving this takes you the rest of your life, you have to be willing to go the distance. And here's the deal. It's not going to take the rest of your life. But until you're actually willing to surrender and say, you know what, I'm genuinely okay. If this takes the rest of my life, I'm going to go after it with all I've got and do what I can to surrender. You actually remove the fear around the grieving process, and then the grieving can move through you, and then you can move on in life.
Got you. And you bring up another excellent point of getting help, right? Having a counselor or a therapist. Can you speak on how helpful it's been to have someone to help you go through that process, and then the support, around it?
Yeah, it's necessary. You can't see, right? Your central nervous system is designed to protect you and to keep you in a sympathetic, when we're talking sympathetic, your logic mode, where it's like, oh my God, I'm being triggered. What do I do? A lot of what we feel when we lash out in anger or rage, or we come undone and we lose it, right? And then we're like, shit, like, why did I do that? You have to understand that your triggers and what's being triggered in your life, your central nervous system is going to try to protect you from actually seeing the truth of that, because seeing the truth of that is vulnerable. And the last time, your body remembers everything. Like, there's a great book out there called The Body Keeps the Score. Your body remembers all of this trauma, right? And so you're not going to be able to see what you need to see to actually heal and move on. But whenever you provide a therapist, or get a therapist or a counselor or a mentor or somebody sitting across from you, they become a mirror. They become a mirror now to help you see inside of yourself what you need to see, so that you can address what you need to address. You can heal what you need to heal, which now helps you surrender more, let go more, so that you can create space to invite the new in.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's what was really big for me. And the thing about therapy, if any therapist that's worth it's worth being called a therapist, they're not going to tell you what the answer is. right? They're going to help you find your truth. They're going to help you find your own answer. Their job is just to be a mirror, to mirror back the things that you need to see that you can't see alone. Because when you see it, then you can address it.
Correct. You bring up an excellent point. I like the analogy of the therapist being a mirror. That's a very good point, because, you know, as a person, you define your happiness and what it is. And so there's no cookie cut answer to it. You know, it's something that you have to go through and figure out. So, I mean, that's awesome. The other portion to this, and this is my last question, it's around the collateral damage, right? So the people around you, what they had to go through during your process as well, and the steps you had to take to mend those relationships back.
Yeah. Right? It's a great question. I don't think anybody has ever actually asked me that question. That's a really great question. It is so necessary and critical to begin to practice boundaries, right? Whenever, and this is the deal, I've hurt a lot of people along the way, especially at West Point. You know, my rage, my anger. I was just a very, very wounded person, and I've hurt a lot of people along the ways. And part of the grieving process, as much as I could reach out to people and apologize, which I actually had a season in my life where I reached out and apologized to people, how they responded was their decision. I did what I felt like I needed to do. That was really big. But also knowing that whenever you're following your heart and maybe going into healing seasons, you have to protect and honor what's important for you. And the hard part about that is a lot of the people closest to you might not agree with it. They might not see eye to eye on it. They might not see why you're doing what you're doing. My family, like, I thought I lost some of my family, and it's because I couldn't explain to them what I was doing. Like, I just knew it was right for me, but I couldn't necessarily process it to them because I didn't have the words for it. And they were mad at me. They thought I was joining a cult. Some of my friends were kind of like, all right, man, bye. And that was really hard because you feel all alone. You feel like, you know, you're walking through the wilderness all alone now. And truth is, you have to go through that season of the wilderness. And you have to protect what you think is right and not live any more according to what other people or other people's expectations of what you should do. And I really had to learn what it looks like to trust that relationships will be mended on the other side of that journey. And I can honestly say that I remember getting phone calls and text messages as I began to communicate and write more and share more parts of my story, you know, a while back ago. People started to say, it makes sense now, Caleb. It makes sense. And we were able to reconcile those relationships. And now, as a result, my relationships are even closer. So I think there was two parts to that answer. I don't even know if I answered your question.
You did.
But I did have to step out of my own comfort and apologize to the best of my ability. And there were people that I legitimately apologized to for being a jerk and being the way that I was. And sometimes they didn't respond. You know, and I'll be honest with you, Greg, I still have therapy sessions of dealing with shame that I never went to war, or that I didn't do what my classmates were obligated to do, right? Because I'll be honest, like, people from West Point treat me differently. There are some classmates, some teammates that don't look me in the eye, and thought we were okay, but they don't. And I've learned to accept that. But at the end of the day, there was a season, and it still kind of rises up to me, like, did I make the wrong choice? Like, with going to the NFL when my classmates were going off to war, like, was I trying to get out of service? Like, I'm being honest. I'm like, was I trying? And there was a lot of shame, feeling like you're a coward for the longest time. And I've had to reconcile all of that with me. And I've done a lot of work with that, and I'm at peace with it. But that also led me to having conversations with other people, because at the end of the day, like, we're made for harmony. We're made for connection. We're made for community. And I want to make sure that I do my part on trying to establish that connection and then let it go there, and how they choose they want to respond, that's on them.
Yeah. my son just came in. Yep. Here, come here. Come say hi.
Hey, my man, what's up?
You got it.
What's your name?
Say Gavin. Tell him your name.
Gavin.
Yep. Well, look,
Gavin, you a football player?
Say yes.
Yes.
Well, look, brother, I appreciate you doing this. Any last words that you want to say to to the listeners out there before we sign off?
Greg, I think the only thing that I would say is I have found everything that I've been looking for my entire life. And the way that I've learned how to find it, or not the way, but what I've realized that what I'm looking for my entire life is learning how to abide in the present moment. Because in the present moment is when you encounter the presence, the spirit of life, the spirit of God. And it's what fulfills us. It's what brings us joy. It's what brings us happiness, is learning in the present moment. And if there's any, and I know that sounds like kind of like, yeah, whatever, but I honestly, if there's any advice I could ever give anybody, and what I give to myself is, what does it look like to abide in the present today? To surrender your need to figure it out, to forgive yourself for the mistakes you made in the past, or the people who have wronged you, or the whatever, and just be here today. And if you can't be here, get curious on why not. Because I could never live in the present moment, because when your life is driven by shame reduces you into believing that you're not enough. So you're going to spend all of your time looking outside of yourself, trying to give only what you can give yourself. And only until you build resilience around shame, then can you actually live in the present moment. Because why would you ever want to live in the present moment if deep down you don't believe that you're enough? You won't, right? But when I built resilience around shame and learned how to live in the present and practice being in the present, I found everything that I was looking for my entire life.
Got you. Well, I appreciate them last words of wisdom. That's very powerful. And to everyone out there, we're signing off with Guards Down. Stay safe, stay focused, and stay engaged. All right.